The afternoon Naomi realized she could no longer outrun the past. She was standing at the reception desk of her architecture firm, with a revised site plan in one hand and her phone in the other. She heard Piper before she saw her. "Mummy." The small voice cut straight through the open concept office, and then there was the sound of small rubber-soled boots slapping against polished concrete. Piper came around the corner at full speed, her dark pigtails slightly unraveled from the morning. Dorothy followed a few steps behind, carrying 2 paper cups from the Tim Hortons down the street, and wearing the expression she always wore when she had done something she already knew Naomi would question. "We were in the neighborhood," Dorothy said, setting the cups on the reception desk. Double for you. Hot chocolate for Madam." Naomi crouched down and caught Piper mid-run. She smelled like cold air and cocoa. "Your mom said school finishes at 3, Dorothy added. "It finishes at 2:30 on Thursdays." "I know, Mom." "Then remember on Thursdays." Naomi straightened, and that was the moment she saw him. Griffin Hartwell was standing near the firm's entrance, where he had apparently just come in from the street. He was in conversation with one of the junior architects, a rolled presentation tube under one arm. He had not changed as much as she had hoped. The same height, the same way of holding himself, as if the room were slightly smaller with him in it. He had let his hair grow a little, that was all. He hadn't seen her yet. Naomi's hand found Piper's shoulder. Then, Griffin turned. For a moment, neither of them moved. The office carried on around them. Someone's phone rang, a printer chimed, 2 people laughed about something in the back corner. Griffin looked at Naomi the way people look at something they believed they had forgotten, only to discover they had been thinking of it the whole time. Then his gaze dropped to Piper. The little girl looked back at him with the particular open curiosity that belongs only to children who haven't yet learned to hide what they feel. She had Naomi's eyes, but the line of her jaw, the way her brow sat slightly furrowed, even when she wasn't thinking about anything difficult. Griffin's expression shifted without him meaning it to. He knew, or he was beginning to. Naomi straightened and looked directly at the junior architect. "Trevor, can you take this to the boardroom? I'll be right there." She handed over the site plan, took Piper by the hand and turned to her mother. "Mom, Piper needs to get home for dinner." Dorothy looked from her daughter to the man standing near the entrance. She had met Griffin only once, 4 years ago, before everything. She had not forgotten him either. She took Piper's other hand without being asked. "Say goodbye to Mummy," Dorothy said. "Bye, Mummy." Piper stretched up for a kiss. Naomi pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and held on for just 1 second longer than usual. They met 3 years before Piper was born, when Naomi was 26 and had just been promoted to project lead at Sullivan Plus Park. The Hartwell Group had hired the firm to redesign the public atrium of their flagship property in downtown Vancouver, and Griffin attended the first client briefing in place of his father. He arrived with no apology for being 8 minutes late, asked 2 very sharp questions that reordered the entire discussion, and then, while Naomi was talking him through the proposed material palette, said, "You're not reading from notes." "No," she said. "Most people do. I wrote the proposal. I know what's in it." He smiled. It was brief and entirely genuine. Fair enough. She told herself she didn't think about it afterward. He called the firm the following week. He asked specifically for her. What followed was not a courtship in any grand sense. Coffee to discuss the atrium project, then coffees that began to be about other things. She told him about her mother coming to Canada alone at 22. About the summer she had spent in her grandmother's apartment in Kowloon as a teenager, and how she had gone home understanding, for the first time, what it meant to be built from 2 places at once. Griffin listened without filling the silences prematurely. That was rarer than it should have been. They were together for 14 months. The first problems were small. Cecily Hartwell invited Naomi to lunch at a restaurant in West Vancouver, where the tables were far enough apart that you could speak privately. She wore a cream blazer and asked very polite questions about Naomi's work, her family, her long-term plans. The politeness was absolute, so was the distance. By the end of the meal, Naomi understood that she had been assessed and found insufficient, though nothing specific had been said to confirm it. She mentioned it to Griffin on the drive back. He said his mother took time to warm up to people. He said it as if it were a fact about the weather. "She's not warming up," Naomi said. "She's being cordial while she decides what to do about me. She'll come around." Naomi looked out the window at the water and said nothing else. There were other moments. The Hartwell family dinner in West Van, where Arthur had asked about her firm's revenue with the tone of someone verifying credentials. A weekend in Whistler where Cecily had, in front of 4 other people, referred to the architects Hartwell Group worked with as their service partners. Not meanly, just accurately from where she was standing. And then there was the afternoon Naomi saw the email. She hadn't been looking for anything. Griffin's laptop was open on the kitchen counter, and she had leaned over to check the time. The subject line was long enough to read without clicking. The Alderton matter, timeline for announcement. She had heard the Alderton name from a colleague whose husband moved in those circles. The Aldertons were a real estate family from Calgary. They had a daughter Griffin's age. She asked him about it that evening. He was quiet for longer than someone with nothing to hide. He said the families had discussed something years ago. That it wasn't serious. That it was his parents, not him. "Are you still discussing it?" she asked. "Not actively." "What does that mean?" He said he would handle it. He said she didn't need to worry. He said a lot of things that weren't quite answers, and she sat across from him and understood that the question she was really asking was not, "Are they still discussing it, but did you tell them it was finished?" The answer to that one was no. She left his apartment that night and did not return his calls the following day. She gave it 5 days. On the 5th day, he came to her door and said he was sorry, and that he had spoken to his parents. He did not say exactly what they had agreed to. She let him in because she wanted badly to believe him, which she understood even then was not the same as believing him. 2 weeks later, she overheard a conversation she was not meant to hear. One of Cecily's friends at a charity event, speaking to another woman, not knowing Naomi was standing on the other side of the floral arrangement. "The wedding is already being planned, apparently. Spring in Calgary. The girl is lovely, very understated." Naomi set down her glass of sparkling water and left without saying goodbye to anyone. That night she ended things with Griffin. He argued. She said she had listened to him tell her not to worry more times than she could count, and she had, and this was the result. She said she was sorry, and she meant it, and she left. She did not know she was pregnant until 6 weeks after that. The doctor at the clinic on Commercial Drive explained that Naomi had a structural irregularity in her uterus, something minor but significant in the context of pregnancy. Careful monitoring would be required, and if this pregnancy did not continue, the chances of another successful conception were considerably reduced. Naomi sat with that information for 3 days. On the 4th, she called Dorothy. Dorothy said nothing for a long time. Then, "You're keeping it." It wasn't a question. Yes. Does he know? Not yet. Griffin had a right to know. She had not talked herself out of that. She arranged to meet him at a cafe on Main Street and brought nothing except the document from the clinic. She slid it across the table. He read it. His face moved through several things in quick succession. He asked if she was sure. He asked how far along. He did not ask how she was feeling. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn with one hand and said that things had ended between them for a reason, and this was a lot to absorb, and he wasn't sure what the right thing to do was. She picked the document back up and said she understood. He called 11 times that night. She did not answer. The next morning he was outside her building. He said he had panicked. He said his first reaction was not his real answer. She looked at the man in front of her and understood, with real clarity, that his real answer and his first reaction were probably not as different as he wanted them to be. She said she needed time to think. What happened next, she had not anticipated. 10 days later, Cecily called and asked to meet, not at a restaurant this time, at a coffee shop near Naomi's neighborhood, neutral, deliberate, chosen to feel private. Cecily arrived first. "You're pregnant," Cecily said once Naomi had sat down. Naomi did not answer. "I know you are," Cecily said. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "What are you here for?" Cecily folded her hands on the table. "If the child is Griffin's, the matter is no longer only between the two of you. Our family has a responsibility to that child. We'd like to ensure it's raised well. We can provide things that are very difficult to provide on a single income with a demanding career." A pause. "We're not trying to be unkind." Naomi looked at her. "And what about me?" Cecily's expression did not change. "You're talented. You have real prospects. This doesn't have to define the next 30 years of your life. If you're willing to cooperate, we can make sure you're taken care of financially. We're not asking you to disappear, just to be reasonable." The word reasonable hung between them. "You're asking me to give you my child," Naomi said. "We're asking you to consider what's best for the child." Naomi stood up. She left without another word. She walked home in the cold. She thought about Cecily's face. Not cruel, not monstrous, just utterly certain that she held the winning position. She thought about Griffin saying his mother would come around. She thought about what coming around apparently looked like. A week later, she met Griffin again at the same cafe on Main Street. He set a small velvet box on the table without opening it. He said he had thought carefully. He wanted to marry her. He wanted them to figure this out together. She looked at the box. "Your mother came to see me," she said. His expression shifted. "She offered me money to cooperate, to let your family raise the baby, to step aside." He was very still. "She wouldn't." "She did." Naomi met his eyes. "I'm not angry with you for that. I know you didn't send her. But I need you to understand something. When I went to your family home and felt what I felt, I stayed quiet because you asked me to give it time. When I heard that conversation at the event, I waited because you said not to worry. When your mother described my child as a responsibility to be managed, I understood that this is how things work in your family, and every time, you were somewhere nearby asking me to be patient." Griffin said nothing. "If I stayed, and this baby was born, and someday your family decided they wanted something different than what we had agreed, what would you do?" The silence told her what she needed to know. She picked up the velvet box and set it back in front of him. She said the baby was gone. She said she had lost it 2 weeks ago. She kept her voice level. When she looked up, his eyes were red. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. She was already deciding everything that would come next. Piper was born in March, in a hospital room in Vancouver, where the only other person present was Dorothy, who held Naomi's hand and told the obstetrician 3 times that her daughter was doing very well. Thank you. She just needed to breathe. When the nurse put Piper into Naomi's arms for the first time, Naomi said nothing for a long while. She just looked at her. Piper had arrived slightly early, and her face was still creased from the effort of being new to the world. And Naomi touched one finger to the back of her tiny fist. The baby wrapped her fingers around it at once. "Hi," Naomi said quietly. "I've been thinking about you." Dorothy sat in the chair beside the bed and pressed her lips together, and did not say anything about the father, or the Hartwell family, or whether any of this was going to be manageable. She only reached over and straightened Naomi's blanket. "You'll both be fine," she said. The way she said things she had already decided were true. The years that followed were hard in the ways Naomi had expected and softer in some she hadn't. Sullivan Plus Park kept her on through the maternity leave and promoted her 18 months after she returned. She bought a used jogging stroller that Dorothy declared ugly and used constantly. She learned to sleep in pieces and to cook with Piper on her hip, and to work on proposals after 8:30, when the apartment went quiet. When Piper was 3, she asked where her dad was. Naomi had rehearsed this. She said her dad lived somewhere else. Piper thought about it, then asked if he knew about her. Naomi said she would explain more when Piper was older. Piper turned back to the block tower she was building. She had Griffin's brow even then, if Naomi let herself look. Griffin came back into her life on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She had been presenting at a sustainable architecture symposium at the Vancouver Convention Center, a mid-morning panel on adaptive reuse in commercial heritage buildings. She saw him from the stage. He was in the 3rd row, which meant he had found out she was speaking and chosen to sit close enough to be unavoidable. She finished the presentation without altering a single word. Afterward, in the hallway, he was waiting. "I heard you were speaking," he said. "I see that. Our group is converting a building in Gastown. I'm overseeing it." She said she hoped the project went well and turned to go. He said her name. She stopped without turning around. "Is there anything left of what we had? Anything at all?" She turned partway. "I need to get back." She did not stop shaking until she was in a taxi. She did not tell Dorothy about the encounter for 2 days. "He's back," Dorothy said when she did. Not a question. "Working in the city." "Did he see Piper?" "Not yet." Dorothy looked at her daughter. "Vancouver isn't that big, Naomi." 4 days after the symposium, Griffin walked into Sullivan Plus Park. 7 minutes after that, Piper ran around the corner in her Thursday boots. And less than a minute after that, Griffin looked at Naomi's daughter, and something settled in his face that looked like recognition arriving after a very long journey. "He called that evening," she answered. She's mine, isn't she? Naomi set down the dish she was drying. Tell me I'm wrong, he said. She didn't say anything. His voice changed. You told me you lost the baby. I know. You've been raising her for 4 years. Yes. The silence on the line was very long. How old is she? She'll be 5 in March. He let out a breath that sounded like something coming loose. He asked what her name was. When Naomi told him, he repeated it quietly, as if he were writing it somewhere inside himself. I spent months believing I had lost a child, he said finally. I know. Were you lying when you said it? Yes. Another silence. Why? She told him about his mother's visit. She told him about the coffee shop, about the word cooperative, about the way Cecily had laid out the arrangement as if it were a matter of basic logistics. She told him she had stood outside his apartment in November rain and made the calculation she had to make with the information she had. He was quiet for a long time. I would have protected you, he said. You would have tried, she said. I didn't know if that was the same thing. She let him meet Piper in a public space, a weekend market near the seawall, open and busy. She told Piper the night before that there was someone she wanted her to meet, someone who was an old friend. Piper asked if the person was nice. Naomi said she was still figuring that out. At the market, Griffin crouched down to Piper's height with the stiffness of a man unaccustomed to the posture. He said hello. Piper stared at him the way she stared at things she was deciding about. You have my eyebrows, Piper said. Naomi turned away briefly. Behind her, she could hear Griffin's voice catch slightly before he said, I think you might be right. The next several weeks were careful. Naomi set the terms and Griffin followed them. Parks, the Science Center, a railway museum near Squamish, where Piper consumed 2 hours of locomotive information with the focus of a graduate student. Griffin had looked up the exhibits in advance. He had written things down. When Piper asked him a question he couldn't answer, he said he didn't know. And Piper told him, her mom said people shouldn't make things up when they didn't know. And Griffin looked over Piper's head at Naomi, with an expression she didn't try to interpret. Cecily found out through Arthur, who had heard from someone Griffin had been incautious around. She called Naomi directly. Her voice was the same, measured, certain. I imagine this is complicated for everyone, Cecily said. I'm not interested in discussing it with you. She's our granddaughter. She is, and the person who decides how and when she meets you is me, and possibly Griffin and no one else. We have resources. I know you have resources, Naomi said. You told me about them once before. It didn't work then. She ended the call and emailed a recording of it to herself. The morning Naomi agreed to let Griffin take Piper for the day, a Saturday the aquarium, every detail confirmed the night before. She checked Piper's backpack 4 times. The blue inhaler in the front pocket, the emergency one behind it, and Piper's asthma protocol written on a card she put in Griffin's jacket pocket and watched him read. Top button stays open on her coat, he said, reciting it back. The card stays with her. It will. What? Piper marched past her mother toward the car without looking back, clutching the small plush beluga whale that had been a fixture in her life for 2 years. Bye, Mummy. Call me from the aquarium. I know. If you feel your chest getting tight, I know, Mummy. Piper had the particular patience of children who have been told the same important thing enough times to have absorbed it entirely. Griffin paused at the car door and looked back at Naomi. I'll have her back by 6. She watched the car turn at the corner. Then she went inside and worked until the call came. It came at 4:20, not from Piper's watch, from an unknown number. It was Rosamund Alderton. Naomi had known the name. She had never spoken to her. I think you need to know what's happening, Rosamund said. Her voice was calm, slightly apologetic. Arthur called this afternoon. He asked Griffin to bring Piper to the house in West Van. Griffin said he wasn't going to. Arthur said if he didn't, he'd send someone else. Naomi was already moving. Where is she now? At the house. She started wheezing about 20 minutes ago. Griffin found the inhaler, but he can't get her calm enough to use it properly. She keeps asking for you. Naomi had her coat on before Rosamund finished the sentence. I'm calling 911. Don't let anyone give her anything else. She was in a cab in 4 minutes. She called Griffin's cell twice before he picked up. She could hear Piper in the background, that high, effortful pull at the end of each exhale that every parent of an asthmatic child learns to recognize like a second heartbeat. She told Griffin exactly what to do, step by step, and he did it. And she heard Piper's breathing begin to ease by the time the cab turned onto the road that led to the Hartwell estate. She was at the gate when the ambulance arrived. The security guard would not let her in. He said he had been told to keep the entrance clear. She told him her daughter was inside with an active asthma attack, and if he did not open the gate, she would give his name to the paramedics pulling up behind her. The gate opened. She ran. The hospital in West Van kept Piper overnight for observation. Her stats were fine by 10 o'clock. She was eating crackers and watching a nature documentary on the wall-mounted television, and had asked twice whether Rosamund was a nice person, because Rosamund had stayed with her in the guest room until Naomi arrived, and read to her from a chapter book she'd found on a shelf. Griffin sat in the corridor outside Piper's room for most of the night. He did not try to come in. After midnight, Naomi stepped out for a cup of terrible coffee from the vending machine down the hall, and he was still there. "You can go home," she said. "I'd like to stay." She sat down in the chair beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. "Your father called while you were with her," she said. "He told you to bring her to the house." "Yes." "And you said no." "Yes." "And then you brought her anyway." He looked at the floor. "He said he'd send someone. I thought I was preventing something worse." "You were following his instructions and telling yourself you were making a choice." He didn't argue with that. It was the most honest thing that had happened between them in years. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "She was asking for me, while her chest was closing, and I was standing outside a gate." "I know." "You know, and you still took her there." "I was trying." "I understand what you were trying to do." Her voice stayed level. That was the hardest part, keeping her voice level when what she felt had no clean name. "But she is 4 years old and she was frightened and I was outside, and she had no way to know if I was coming. That is something she will remember." Griffin was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, something in him had come apart at the seams. "My father said that if I took her home, you'd use it against me. That I'd spend the rest of my life visiting my daughter on your schedule." He looked at his hands. "I was afraid he was right." Naomi looked at him. "Has every single thing I've agreed to since you came back not been on your schedule?" He had no answer. "I hid her from you," she said. "That was wrong. I knew it was wrong, and I made that choice anyway because I was terrified of your family, and I did not trust you to choose her over them." She paused. "Tonight, the first time I genuinely trusted you, your father called, and you chose him." He turned away. "I'm not asking you to stop being his son," she said. "I'm asking you to understand that being Piper's father means she has to be able to trust you. Not just love you, trust you." 6 weeks later, they met with a mediator in a quiet office in Kitsilano. A round table, deliberately chosen. Naomi brought Dorothy. Griffin came alone. Cecily and Arthur arrived and were asked to wait in the lobby because they were not parties to any agreement. A child specialist had spent 40 minutes with Piper that morning. Piper had drawn a picture of herself, her mother, and a tall person she identified as her dad standing in front of what she said was a train museum. There was no house in the drawing. There was a large sun. When the mediator asked Piper where she liked to sleep, Piper said at home. When she asked if she wanted to visit her dad, Piper said yes, but she wanted to be able to call her mum. When the mediator asked if she was scared of her dad, Piper thought about it very seriously. When Daddy listens, Piper said no. Griffin sat with that. Arthur had managed to enter the room at some point, making a careful argument about stability and legacy, and the Hartwell name. Griffin looked at his father, the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they have decided to rearrange. "I'm going to ask you to step out, Dad." Arthur stared at him. "Piper lives with her mother," Griffin said, his eyes still on his father. "I'll see her on a schedule that works for both of us. Overnight visits when she's ready. No unilateral decisions." He paused. "My parents are not authorized to contact Piper or take her anywhere without both of us agreeing in advance." Cecily, who had followed Arthur in, made a sound. "That includes you," Griffin said. He was looking at the mediator when he said it, not at his mother, which was somehow more final. Arthur left without speaking. Cecily stayed a moment longer. She looked at Naomi with an expression that held something complicated. Not an apology, not quite, but something that acknowledged the years between them and did not pretend they hadn't happened. Then she left. The room was quiet. Piper reached over and put her small hand on top of her mother's. Can we have pho after? She asked. Dorothy laughed before she could stop herself. Naomi squeezed Piper's hand and said yes. Rosamond sent a text to Naomi 3 days after the mediation. It said, "I've stepped away from the arrangement with the Hartwells. Not because of any of this, it was already over. I just wanted you to know it wasn't something I was ever fighting to keep." Naomi thought about that for a moment, then typed back, "Thank you for staying with her that night." There was a pause, then she told me about the beluga whale. I feel like I know him personally now. Naomi smiled at her phone in the quiet kitchen. On the first Saturday of December, Naomi stood on the sidewalk outside her building and watched Griffin buckle Piper into the booster seat of his car. Cold enough that breath showed. Piper was wearing her red toque, pulled down over her ears, arguing cheerfully about whether the new train exhibit would have a working signal light or just a static one. Griffin was losing the argument. He looked up from the booster and caught Naomi's eye. He mouthed the words 6 o'clock. She nodded. Piper waved at her through the window, a big, uncomplicated wave, the wave of a child who has no doubt that the person she is waving at will still be there when she comes back. Naomi waved back. She watched the car turn at the corner and held her coffee cup in both hands until the cold air folded back in around the space it had left. Then she went upstairs and sat at her drafting table and worked until 4:30, when she stopped to start dinner because her daughter was coming home.